often when we're writing a program, we'll have code that's repeated over and over again. In this case, you can see this will display hello to the screen 5 times, right, followed by an endl. And, you know, it's fine to do this, but when we repeat code over and over again, we generally will put that code in some type of a loop. A loop is a structure that will allow you to repeat a section of code over and over again. So in this example, I'm going to demonstrate a for loop. So instead of doing this 5 times, I'm going to repeat this section of code, this one cout statement 5 times. So I'm going to use a for loop. A for loop is a good loop to use. It's considered a counting loop, so if you know that you want to do something a certain number of times, a for loop is a good loop to choose. So in this case, I want to do it 5 times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this code inside of a loop. And with a for loop, we start with the reserved word for, and then we have parentheses, and 3 things go inside the parentheses. We start off with an initialization statement, and we have to pick a name for our counter. You could call it count, you could call it C, which is short for count. The counter is going to be an integer here, so I could call it I. So I'm just going to create a counter, and it's going to start at 1. The next is the condition that gets checked to see if the loop should continue or not. So I'm going to continue while my counter is less than or equal to 5, and then I'm going to increment I. So what happens with a for loop, it does this statement once. It sets I to 1. It checks to see if this loop condition is true. 1 less than or equal to 5 is true. So it will output hello. And then after it outputs hello, it evaluates this update expression, and I becomes 2. So as soon as that happens, it checks the condition. 2 less than or equal to 5 is true. It'll output hello again, and then after it outputs hello, it does the update expression, and I becomes 3. Goes back here, 3 less than or equal to 5 is true. We execute the cout statement, and we now increment I to 4. And then we go through again, 4 less than or equal to 5 is true. We're going to see out hello right here after our last statement. We increment I, right? I plus plus, it becomes 5. This is true. It's going to go through one more time, see out hello. And again, we're going to increment I to 6. At this point, I less than or equal to 5 will be false. The loop will end, and we'll continue on with the rest of the program. Okay, so you can see that does the same thing. It displays hello to the screen 5 times. Okay, so that's how a simple for loop works. I want to show you a couple of things. When you declare I right here inside the for loop, if you later on try and use I, like if you want to display it, you'll get this message that says I is undefined. When you declare a variable in a for loop here, it only has meaning inside the for loop. So if you wanted to use I later in the program for something, instead you would need to declare it up here and not inside the for loop. And that's perfectly acceptable syntax, but now down here I could actually display the value of I, right? It doesn't look great, but there's my little number 6, which is the value of I, okay? So this is just a loop that goes through 5 times. We can have loops that count up, like this one. I goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can have loops that count down. Okay, and so I is going to be 10, which is greater than or equal to 5. So it'll be hello, then it'll be decrement to 9, which is greater than or equal to 5, and it will go through. Okay, and this time you'll see 6 hellos on the screen, because this loop is going to go through when it's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and 5, which would be 6 times. Okay. You can sometimes have a loop that doesn't ever get executed. I is 10. 10 less than or equal to 5 is initially false, so the loop just ends here. And nothing displays. So a for loop is a pretest loop, which means before the body of the loop is ever executed, you check that condition. So initially, if it's false, then the loop will not execute, and that's okay. That's what happens sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my original loop that I had here. Okay. Now I just want to show you, I'm going to declare another variable here. I'm going to call it number of times. And I'm going to ask the user, how many times do you want to display hello? And then I'm going to cin number of times. And down here, instead of 5, I'm going to use my variable. So I'm just showing you that you don't have to have a number here. You can use a variable. So if I run this now, it'll say how many times. I'll say 3, and it'll go through my loop 3 times. Okay, so this is a good counting loop. So anytime you kind of know how many times you're going to go through, even if that number of times is held in a variable, this would be a good choice for the type of loop that you actually want to use. Okay. I'll just want to show you a few things. With a for loop, if you don't have the curly braces here, the next one statement will be the body of the loop. So this code here would still work. But a lot of times I recommend for beginning programmers to do this, to put the curly braces around, just so that it's really clear for you what you want to do. You know, inside of the body of the loop, you can use the loop counter if you want. Like here I could, instead of hello, I could output I, and that should display 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, up to whatever the number of times is. So I could do that. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this probably is not a good cout statement. You know, how many times do you want to, let's say, loop? Okay, because I'm not using the cout hello here. And, you know, I can have more than one statement in here. Okay, so now when I run this, I'm going to go through, you know, I'll choose 4, just use a different number. This will display I, which is 1 and 1 squared. Then I becomes 2 and 2 squared. Then I becomes 3 and 3 squared. Then I becomes 4 and 4 squared. Okay, you want to be really careful, as I talked about before. Here's just some common pitfalls. Don't leave off the curly braces. If you want both of these statements to be in the body of the loop, you need the curly braces. Notice that this is very different from what I did in the previous example. It does 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 25. So this is just the body of the loop displaying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it's executing, or 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the number of times I put in, and then it's executing 5 times 5. So this and this are very different. So beware of that. And also beware of infinite loops. Don't ever put a semicolon out here. You'll notice this gives us an infinite loop, which is just Oh, that won't give us an infinite loop now that I'm looking at it. Sorry. What's going to happen here is this becomes the body of the loop. So it's going to go through, if I enter 4 here, it's going to go through 4 times, executing 4 semicolons, and then it'll output the 5, and it'll output 25. Okay, so just be careful not to put a semicolon. I know that you're used to putting semicolons at the end of things, but they don't go at the end of a for loop. So that's just about everything you need to know about a for loop.